True stories that prove you should never walk alone at night. The first mistake was thinking the night was empty. That's how it always begins, an illusion of silence, a false promise that the dark is harmless. But the dark is never harmless. It listens. It watches. It waits for the moment you step into it alone. It was a small town in upstate New York, the kind where the streets turned quiet after 10 p.m. Emily, a college student, had just finished studying late at the library. Her apartment was only a 15-minute walk away, and she liked the peace of those midnight walks. She told herself it cleared her mind. But that night, the peace felt staged, like someone had dressed the street in stillness, hiding something just beyond her sight. The lamps along the road flickered, throwing weak pools of light that melted quickly into the shadows. Her footsteps echoed against the pavement, too loud, she thought. She pulled her coat tighter, glanced behind her, and told herself she was imagining it. Nobody was there. At least, nobody she could see. She cut across the park, the fastest route home. The trees towered like sentinels, their bare branches twisting into shapes that clawed at the sky. She felt the weight of silence press in on her, and then she noticed it. A second set of footsteps, faint but deliberate, matching her pace. Every time she stopped, it stopped. Every time she quickened, it followed. Her breath came faster. She scanned the path behind her, but the park was empty, the benches and pathways deserted. Still, the sound persisted, just out of sync, as though whatever was following her wanted her to know. It was there. A whisper cut through the silence, so soft she almost doubted she heard it. "Keep walking." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She broke into a jog, telling herself it was just in her head, an echo, a trick of exhaustion. But then the shadows seemed to swell, growing thicker, darker, until the path ahead of her looked like a mouth opening wide. Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She yanked it out, desperate to call a friend, but the screen was black. Not dead. Just black. As if something had drained the light out of it. Behind her, the footsteps grew heavier. Closer. She bolted, her breath burning in her lungs, her shoes slapping against the cold pavement. The lamp posts flickered out one by one as she passed beneath them, plunging her deeper into the dark. She didn't look back, not until she reached the edge of the park, where the streetlights glowed steady again. She spun around. Nothing. Just the empty path stretching into the trees. But then she saw it. Not someone. Not exactly. A figure, pale and distorted, half-formed in the shadows. It didn't move like a person. It flickered as though it were struggling to hold its shape. Its face was a blur, but she swore its eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, hungry. Emily stumbled back, nearly tripping on the curb. The figure took a step forward, and though its legs never seemed to move, it covered the distance between them too quickly. She ran, sprinting the last 2 blocks to her apartment. She fumbled with her keys, slammed the door shut, and pressed her back against it, gasping. For a moment, she thought she was safe. But then, in the silence of her living room, she heard it. The footsteps. Inside. And the whisper again, right by her ear. "You shouldn't have walked alone." True stories that prove you should never walk alone at night. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat frozen on her couch until dawn broke, staring at the door, convinced she'd see it turn, convinced that the thing she'd glimpsed in the park was waiting just beyond the thin layer of wood between her and the hallway. The whisper still rattled in her skull. "You shouldn't have walked alone." Morning brought no comfort. The sunlight painted her apartment in pale gold, but the corners seemed darker than usual, as if they were swollen with shadows that refused to leave. She thought about telling someone, her roommate, her friends, but how do you explain something like that? How do you admit the night itself followed you home? For a while, she managed to convince herself she was just tired. Stress. Exams. A trick of the mind. But when she turned on the kitchen faucet to make coffee, the water came out black. She yelped and jumped back. The stench was unbearable, like rotting earth. Then, as quickly as it began, the water ran clear again. No evidence. Nothing she could show anyone else. She didn't notice at first that her reflection in the kitchen window was late to follow her movements. Only when she leaned close, when she touched the glass with trembling fingers, did she realize it wasn't her reflection at all. The smile came a second too late, stretched a little too wide, and the eyes, those weren't hers. Emily screamed and staggered back, clutching her phone. This time the screen worked, glowing bright in her palm. She called her roommate, begging her to come home early. She didn't want to be alone anymore. By the time her roommate, Sarah, returned, Emily had locked herself in her bedroom. Sarah knocked, confused, and Emily tried to explain, tried to tell her about the figure, the reflection, the black water. Sarah listened, but her expression softened the way people do when they think you're imagining things. She stayed the night anyway, sleeping on the couch, her presence a fragile comfort. But it wasn't enough. At 3:14 a.m. the power went out. Emily woke to silence so thick it felt alive. She crept into the living room and froze. Sarah was sitting upright on the couch, her eyes open, her mouth moving soundlessly. Emily whispered her name, but Sarah didn't respond. She stepped closer. That's when she heard it, Sarah's voice, low, guttural, repeating the same phrase over and over. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Her roommate's head snapped toward her, the motion too sharp, too sudden, like a puppet yanked on strings. The eyes staring back weren't Sarah's anymore. They were hollow, endless, and filled with the same hunger Emily had seen in the park. The air turned ice cold. Every breath Emily took came out in a visible puff of mist. The shadows thickened, swallowing the walls, the furniture, the windows. The living room dissolved into something unrecognizable, a void stretching far too wide for a simple apartment. And then she heard them, footsteps. Not just one pair. Dozens, maybe hundreds, circling, closing in. The whispers rose, layered over one another, voices of men and women, young and old, all murmuring the same words in unison. You shouldn't have walked alone. The voices weren't just around her anymore. They were inside her head, vibrating in her skull. Her body shook violently, her knees buckling. She grabbed Sarah's shoulders, desperate to shake her back to reality, but her hands passed through as though her roommate wasn't solid anymore. Sarah's body flickered like the figure in the park, and then she was gone. Just gone. Emily was alone again. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a single voice, sharp and clear. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floor or even from her head. It was right behind her ear. Look. She turned against every instinct and saw it standing in her doorway. The figure had taken form now, no longer a blur. Its skin was stretched too tight across its bones, its eyes black pits that seemed to drink in the light. Its mouth hung open, too wide, dripping with something dark that wasn't saliva. And though its feet never touched the floor, it took a step toward her. Emily stumbled back, slamming against the wall. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering across the floor. The screen lit up, and for the briefest second, she saw her own face staring back at her. Except it was smiling, eyes black, whispering the words she was too terrified to hear. The lights flickered back on. The apartment was whole again. Sarah was asleep peacefully on the couch. Everything looked normal. Except for the footprints. Wet, black, and leading straight to Emily's bedroom door. And as she stared at them, too afraid to breathe, the doorknob began to turn. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then stopped. Silence draped over the apartment like a heavy blanket. Emily stood frozen, her lungs burning with shallow breaths. Every nerve screamed for her to run, to scream, but her body refused to obey. The air was so cold it felt like knives against her skin. Then came the sound. Slow. Deliberate. The squeal of the doorknob turning all the way. Her bedroom door cracked open, spilling darkness into the hallway, not the ordinary dark of night, but something thicker, more alive, as though it were reaching for her. Emily's voice broke in a whisper. Please, stop. The door swung wide. What stepped out wasn't just the pale figure anymore. It was taller now, stretching, its head grazing the ceiling, its limbs grotesquely elongated, bones cracking with each movement. Its face was no longer blurred, it had borrowed hers. Her smile. Her eyes. But wrong. So wrong. Black pits where pupils should be. A grin torn too far across its face. It raised a hand, skeletal fingers dripping with something black that hissed when it hit the floor. And then it spoke in her voice. You shouldn't have walked alone. Emily bolted, screaming for Sarah. She shook her roommate awake, but Sarah didn't stir. Her eyes snapped open instead, milky white, mouth opening in a soundless scream. The shadows surged up from the floor, swallowing her body whole, leaving only the couch behind. The lights in the apartment exploded, showering sparks. Darkness collapsed inward, suffocating Emily in a void. The walls dissolved, replaced by endless black stretching in every direction. Yet she wasn't alone. Footsteps echoed from everywhere, hundreds of them, circling closer. Figures emerged from the dark, distorted, half-formed people, their faces mangled copies of her own. They walked in unison, their whispers overlapping until it became a roar inside her skull. Keep walking. Emily stumbled backward, but every step echoed too loudly, as though the sound didn't belong to her anymore. Her legs moved on their own, dragging her forward into the circle of twisted reflections. She tried to stop, but her body wouldn't obey. She was walking, and with each step she felt herself fading, her skin colder, her heartbeat slower. Then she saw it. At the center of the circle. The real thing. The entity stood taller than them all, its eyes endless voids, its mouth wide enough to unhinge. When it spoke, it was every voice she had ever known. Her mother, her professors, Sarah, strangers on the street, all blended into one deafening command. You will never walk alone again. Its hand reached out, pressing against her chest. The cold burned through her ribs, straight into her heart. Her vision blurred, and in that final second she understood. This wasn't about being followed home. This wasn't about one night. This was a curse. The moment she stepped into the park, she hadn't been walking alone. She had been chosen. The entity leaned close, its face splitting into a smile that stretched too far. Its whisper slithered into her ear, but this time, it wasn't speaking to Emily. It was speaking to you. You feel it, don't you? That breath on your neck. That chill crawling up your spine. You're not alone anymore. You walked with her through this story, and now you walk with me. Silence. Then a faint knock. Slow. Measured. From inside your walls. If you think this was terrifying, you're nowhere near prepared for what comes next. Make sure you subscribe. You'll need it.